Creatures of the Night. Chapter 1. Prince. One. The neon open sign filled the small gas station with a red glow like it did every night. Cameron Blake, the nighttime cashier, wished the owner would at least put the sign anywhere but right next to his head for the entirety of his 8-hour shift behind the counter. Since his cassette player had recently broken, Cameron read the day's paper, which he'd grabbed off the stack for sale. The red light did little to ease the severity of the gruesome events that were recounted. In fact, it fit quite nicely with the headline that instantly caught Cameron's eye. The piece was titled, "3 Dead in Shoshone. Animal Attack or Psycho Killer." He was just beginning the preamble when his attention was diverted from the page. Somebody had pulled into one of the gas stalls, and they were now on their way across the parking lot to the store. Cameron watched as the figure grew brighter beneath the oppressive glow of the red sign. The customer swung the door open and gave Cameron a nod as he stepped inside, making his way straight to the register.
"Dark night out there,"
the man said as he fished for something from his pocket. "Sure is," Cameron said, and stared out at the darkness, favoring the view of the road to that of the man's face. As he'd gotten closer, it became apparent that his visage was severely scarred. That is, what wasn't covered by a large gray, bushy beard. Veins of white, stretched skin weaved themselves around the man's features. One of his eyes was white and lifeless, staring at Cameron while the man's hand dug around in his leather jacket. For a moment, he felt a bit afraid of what might be produced from the pocket as he stared into the milky eye. Finally, the customer's hand withdrew, holding a $10 bill.
$10 on pump 1,
he said. Cameron punched into the cash register while the man spun around, getting a good look at the junky store he worked in. Cam would say the place had seen better days, but if there had been any better days, he'd never seen them. Come to think of it, the place had never been in an orderly state. Not even the few times he'd stopped there while visiting his mom about half a decade ago. That was before he became a permanent resident of the empty, hilly town in her stead. Shelves of old, hardly organized products lined the walls and center of the store. Pre-packaged, overproduced food took up most of the space, though they also had a row of moth-eaten clothes and other low-quality items. In the back of the store was a dirty, old phone booth and a pair of red doors that opened to the back room. The only reason the old gas station was still in business, Cameron suspected, was because it was the only one along the highway for miles in either direction. This meant that the two types of people who stopped at his place of work either needed gas on their journey somewhere, or despite the chaos and busyness of the world, didn't have anywhere to be at all. The man's living eye met Cameron's when he was handed the receipt.
You hear about those deaths up in Shoshone?
The man asked. The question took Cameron aback. He glanced down at the article he was just reading, having made it only a sentence or two in. Yeah, Cameron said, blankly, as he stared back up at the man.
Strange stuff going on up in Shoshone. Strange stuff. My brother says the bear story is bullshit. He says he's seen some wild things up in them hills. And I ain't talking no bear or mountain lion. I heard them things are more like a devil than any animal that should be walking this earth. Anyway, you be careful out there, you hear?
Yes, sir, Cameron answered, trying his best to keep eye contact with the man's disfigured face. He gave Cameron a little smile and a wave, and with that, the man set off to his truck. His back illuminated a bright crimson as he crossed the lot once again. More intrigued than ever, Cameron turned back to the newspaper and began reading where he'd left off. 2. The sun set early in the mountains, but this was especially true around October, which happened to be the month when a black Dodge drove down the Washington family's long driveway before stopping in front of the small house. It was about 4:45 p.m. when the car parked and a man got out. He was clad in black, save for the shining white priest collar that sat beneath his neatly shaven face. He was a young man who walked in long strides as he made his way up the stairs. He knocked on the door, removing his hat as he did. In one hand he held it to his chest while the other clutched a small, worn Bible. The call to the door was finally answered by an old woman, who cracked it open and gazed up at the handsome young priest. "Oh, hello," she said. "Please, come in, come in." He entered at her request. The home was as small on the inside as it looked on the outside. It was only one story and sat on the outskirts of town.
You must be Father Bowman. Welcome.
A gruff voice said that the priest recognized as the one he had talked to on the phone. "Hello, Mr. Washington. It's good to make your acquaintance. You have a lovely home and please call me William," the priest said with a friendly smile as he took the old man's hand and shook it firmly. Sit down, Mrs. Washington ordered him. "I'll take your hat and coat. Please, make yourself at home. You too, dear," she said to her husband. "Would you like tea?" she asked William. "Yes, please," he said, sitting down in a recliner across from Mr. Washington, who sat at the end of a worn leather couch. The woman put his things on a coat rack and then walked to turn on the kettle in the kitchen. For a few moments, the air was silent between the two men. William looked out the window at the orangish-purple sky.
So,
Mr. Washington said finally.
thanks for coming down on such short notice. I'm sure you have lots of questions, since our conversation was so brief on the phone.
Yeah, William said, thinking. He did, in fact, have many questions. Can you start from the beginning? Like, have you always had issues with, feeling unsafe in your home, feeling watched? Mr. Washington, or Rob as he insisted on being called, started with the story of how he and his wife originally bought their house. It was in 1969 after all of their 3 kids had moved out of their old place. They figured they should downsize to a 1-story house after Meredith had a fall on the stairs late one night. The couple were originally from Jackson Hole, but moved out to the middle of nowhere because Meredith was, quote, sick of the city life. Things were reportedly great for about 6 months, but then the couple began to notice strange things around their property. The 2 were always big dog lovers. They had many dogs of all ages on their property, whom they cared for and let roam around their land out back.
They just kept going missing,
Rob said, a shake in his voice.
Every night, I'd let them out. Sometimes they'd come back. Sometimes they wouldn't. We raised some tough hounds around here, so first couple of them I figured they'd turn up. We got a big property, It's not unusual for them to go missing for a couple days, but...
Rob's eyes gazed out at the large field, lit by twilight, surrounded by what seemed to be a thick forest. The dark pines swayed in the wind.
So, we had to make a fence and keep them fenced in, once those first few never turned up. Thing is, they still kept getting out. I kept checking the fence for holes, but I couldn't find a dang one. I turned my back for 1 minute, and they just up and disappear on me.
Rob pulled a photo of him and his dogs off the table next to him, and looked at it longingly. With all due respect, Rob, William said, pulling the old man's attention away from the photograph. Why did you call me instead of the police? Or animal control? Mr. Washington's face sunk into a grave expression.
Well,
he said, wringing his hands together.
There are some other things going on. I feel like there's something out there, something watching me. I get these dreams every night of just standing on the edge of that field over there and staring out into the dark. Sometimes I can see things between the trees, but I'm unable to move my head or run away. It feels so real. The police don't take me seriously. Tell me to get a tighter fence and keep my shotgun loaded if I'm so paranoid. They sent a few of them down a couple weeks ago, took a look around the woods, and said they couldn't find a single trace of any of my dogs. They didn't believe me when I told them that whatever's going on, it's out in those woods.
He pointed a crooked finger at the row of dark pines beyond the clearing. The moonlight reflected off their slick needles as they danced in the wind, beckoning.
It's all just too much, Father. The dogs, the nightmares, those evil woods. We don't want to move, but we don't want to be scared of our own property. So that's why we called you. Can you bless our house so no evil could enter it, inhabit it?
William's eyes were still fixed on the tree line. I sure can do that for you, sir. I'll do you one better, too, and take a look out in those woods for you, just to ease your mind, he said, finally looking back at Rob. The couple was more than happy with the offer. Mrs. Washington fitted him with gloves and a small flashlight. After a quick blessing to the house, William stepped from the back door into the harsh, quiet night. Once the door closed behind him, the priest nearly slapped himself for offering to be an outdoor sleuth. For whatever reason, he didn't question a single word Rob had said about his experience with the woods. And while it intrigued him, the description terrified him all the same. If there was really something in there taking the dogs, would it take him too? He fully regretted making the offer once he had trudged about a quarter of the way across the field. The flashlight Mrs. Washington had given him didn't produce the divine beam he had hoped for. Rather, the small orange beam lit up the 10 feet in front of him and no more. Could he not have told the couple he would come back in the daylight? The trees began to grow in scale as he got closer, no longer the intelligible wall he saw from inside the house. The Washingtons' property was not quite on the side of a mountain, but it was about as close as you could get. The incline made the forest stand even taller, growing still as William walked along the freezing ground. He passed the now empty dog pen and stood at the tree line of the forest. The small disc of his flashlight didn't reveal much from where he stood. He looked back at the house, only visible from the yellow light of the living room. The cozy feeling he had taken for granted while talking to the Washingtons was calling to him now. Though, something else was pulling at him too. Deep down, he could feel it. He turned back towards the woods, trying to look beyond the branches. All I have to do, he told himself, is take a look around and prove there's nothing in here. May the Lord be my guide. A chill ran down his spine. Nevertheless, he took a step forward and entered the woods. Three. The article began by talking about the lives of the 3 victims before their gruesome attack. Bryce Howard, Jenna Barnes, and Catherine Smith were all friends and students of Shoshone High School. On the night of October 9th, the 3 teens were traveling along Highway 789 after last being seen by their friends at 10:20 p.m. That night, the parents reported them missing to the police. It wasn't until the next morning, October 10th, that the teens' bodies were discovered south of town in the recreational district by search parties. The bodies were almost unrecognizable as human. It was only when the police discovered their heads, buried individually, that the bodies were identified as those of the missing students. The article then details how the holes were in a line, marked only by the piles of dirt that were still obviously disturbed. The heads themselves were in oddly good condition when compared to the rest of the bodies. This fact led some to believe that this was the work of a deranged killer, rather than a ruthless animal. It is reported that autopsies will commence, and a cause of death will be given soon. The article ends with an urge for the people of Shoshone to stay inside after dark. Cameron flopped the newspaper down onto the empty counter. He checked his watch. 5:15 a.m. Only 45 minutes until the end of his shift. While he wasn't excited to go home to his empty, gloomy house, he had grown a bit of a headache from the constant buzzing. At the very least, his mother had never installed a glowing neon sign in his bedroom window, though it wouldn't have been the strangest thing she'd done towards the end of her life. It only took Cameron seconds of thinking about his mom for him to yearn for a cigarette between his lips. He grabbed a fresh pack of them off the rack and stepped outside. The night was cool, but the air was still. Cameron took a seat on the curb and unfurled the plastic wrapping around the cigarette box. He produced a lighter from his coat pocket and lit the cigarette between his lips. Inhaling the smog was familiarly nice. He blew it, and the smoke hung ominously in the air before him. With it, the difficult thoughts of his mother floated from his mind. Cameron had enjoyed his time free of smoking, but he found it was easier to have a fallback than to try and take care of all of his nerves on his own. When they sell peace of mind at the store, sometimes it's easier to cough up the money than it is to try and do it yourself. Especially if you were holding off a tidal wave of feelings and questions like Cameron was. While he sat there, staring off into the darkness of the night, the newspaper story began flooding back to him. His mind raced with ideas of what could have caused such a tragedy. It seemed like an animal being responsible was the obvious explanation. What kind of fucking animal could do that, though? He couldn't think of anything that could have torn a person to bits aside from a bear. Still, that left the question of their skulls, and how they remained miraculously intact. It was a disturbing conundrum, but fascinating nonetheless. Human responsibility was more likely, though it didn't explain the pure brutality of the deaths. Not to mention that it seemed to be a random attack, since there is no clear motive behind it. The idea of a psycho murderer loose on the countryside was, admittedly, not much more comforting than that of a wild animal to Cameron. Now that he thought about it, the psycho was definitely the worse option of the two. He took another drag off the cigarette, adding psycho slasher to the list of things he didn't want to think about anymore. Grinding the butt on the pavement, Cameron rose to face the dark road yet again. It had been a while since he'd seen a customer, the last one being the scarred man who'd warned Cameron about the article. The old man had claimed his brother had seen something. Cameron wondered if it was true. As he walked back into the building, the buzzing taking hold yet again, he questioned whether a mundane explanation could be written off in this case. He wondered whether it was as simple as a psycho killer, or if there really was something in the hills of Shoshone. Something that could rip people to pieces and bury their skulls the way a squirrel would hide nuts for the winter. Something more like a devil than any animal. A chill crept down his spine as he imagined what such a thing might look like. As soon as he got back to his post, Cameron noticed a car pulling towards the parking lot. As it pulled in, he was able to recognize it instantly as the car of small-town business mogul Logan Trowell. He owned a fair few of the businesses in town, including the old gas station that Cameron was currently standing in. Logan parked his white Mustang in his own reserved spot near the entrance. He was a large, round man, and Cameron watched as the car lurched with relief when he stepped out onto the dark pavement and waddled up to the front door.
How's it looking tonight, Cam?
The usual, he said. One customer about every 6 hours. Logan let out a loud, hearty laugh.
I don't know how you do it, boy. I mean, I really appreciate it, really, but all this sitting around in the dark, alone, would drive this old dog up a tree after about 10 minutes, you know? I had 2 or 3 people doing this job before you moved out here. All kinds of problems. You're the best thing to happen to this old place in a long time, Cam. I mean, without you, this place would be a dump. Well,
he looked around at the state of the old store.
Even more of a dump, I guess,
he said, and laughed again. Thank you, sir. I have to do something with these long nights, Cameron said.
Oh yeah, that reminds me why I'm here. I came to tell you that I'm shutting the old place down for about a week. Maintenance and all that, you know. Now, I want you to take the week off and really take it easy. I mean, you've earned it. Spend some time with your loved ones. I'm sure they miss you since you're always working here every night. Plus, I'm sure all this isolation can't be good for a man's health.
Thanks to his lifestyle, Cameron's social life was wilted and brittle to the touch, like a dead rose. You're right, sir. I could use the time off. Thank you.
Enough of the sir. It's Logan, kid. And don't mention it. Now, how about you close it up early tonight and get home? I bet you're pretty tired. I know I am.
He smiled and hoisted his belt up before walking back to the door. Oh, by the way, Cameron started before he was fully out the door. Have you seen the story in this headline? You have a place up in Shoshone, don't you? Have you heard anything about it up there? Logan's jovial attitude dropped at the mention of the story, and his face turned to stone as he looked at Cameron with one foot out the door, his form bathed in the red light of the open sign. Boy, don't go trusting what they say in those papers now. Those poor kids were torn up by some wild animal, and those journalists are looking to make a buck off their deaths. It's sick what it is. Believe me, there ain't nothing mysterious or interesting about a tragic accident. Cameron felt the man's usual warmth return as he tipped his hat and wished him a final good night. He smiled widely, allowing the red light to glisten off his large exposed teeth before he finally stepped out into the darkness, allowing the door to swing closed behind him. Four. There was a rustle somewhere to the left of William as he tried not to trip on any branches or roots hidden under a layer of leaves. He shone his dim flashlight to find nothing but darkness. Sweat ran down his face and beneath the gloves Mrs. Washington had lent him. Another rustle. He snapped the flashlight, but was once again met with an empty patch of woods. The priest spun in circles, shining his light in all possible directions, but the beam revealed nothing to him. At this point, he was as much worried about finding the source of the rustling as he was finding his way back to the trail he had been on. The Washingtons' woods were surprisingly vast, and the trails within seemed to confuse and disorient as much as they did to guide anyone who happened to wander inside. William had felt an evil presence since the moment he entered the woods, but now he felt eyes on him. Another rustle, this time right behind him. In a dash, William tripped over a branch and fell hard onto the leaf-covered ground. He landed on his forearms and rolled over, shining his flashlight back the way he came. The light reflected off a pair of yellow eyes that stared down at him. The discs would be recognizable as the eyes of an animal if they weren't nearly 5 feet off the ground. There was something else reflecting too. It was placed between the two eyes, only lower down. It shimmered in the flashlight the way a piece of metal would. Whatever the creature was, it was standing completely still. William rose to his feet, careful not to move too suddenly. As he did, he slowly brought his flashlight up, pointing it at the face of the creature. For a microsecond, he got a complete look at the thing's face. The word werewolf flashed in his mind, but he knew it wasn't fully accurate in describing the monstrosity. After the brief glimpse at its twisted visage, the beast flung a pair of clawed hands over its bloodshot eyes and dove into the brush. Wasting no opportunity, William took off running again, the image of what he had seen flashing in his mind. The thing was unnatural, he knew now for sure. When he made it to a small clearing, he took the opportunity to catch his breath. Without trees overhead, the moon did a serviceable job of lighting up his surroundings. He kept his eyes on the tree line as he walked to the center of the clearing, hoping a trail would be revealed to him. He removed his hat with a shaky hand and scanned the perimeter carefully. There were noises coming from the woods in all directions. The slight sound of dogs yapping, barking just beyond the veil of darkness the trees formed. It was the same sound he originally left the trail to follow, hoping he'd found one of the Washington's dogs. He was now afraid that he was right. He had found them, though he wasn't quite sure how he was going to break the news if he ever got back to the old couple. The barking faded to a soft whimper, and eventually, it moved away. In his scan of the tree line, William had noticed a path and hoped it would lead him off this cursed property. With a deep breath, he entered it. He followed the trail with cautious optimism that his prayers had been answered, all the while keeping an eye on the path behind him. The priest began to jog slightly when he could see the end of the trail, moonlight filling in the faunal gap as if guiding him to the end of his nightmare. As a flutter of excitement began to rise in his stomach, he felt a strong hand grab the back of his shirt collar and pull him to the ground. Whatever it was then dove on top of him and began gnashing its teeth and claws. The thing bit into his arm hard enough to tear through his coat and still break the skin. Long canine teeth dug into his flesh as the beast growled and began trying to pull him back into the deep woods. Desperate for an escape, the priest reached behind him and grabbed a small log off the ground before smashing it over the creature's head. The aberration howled and released its grip on William's arm, but then pounced again, now aiming for his throat. He held it off with his injured hand, the thing's foul-smelling maw only inches from his face as it snapped and thrashed at him. In the tussle, William was able to grab hold of something secured around the thing's neck. He then reared back and kicked it in the stomach with everything he had. William felt the beast break free from his grasp, and then watched it whimper and run back into the woods on a pair of crooked, deformed legs. It dove into the brush, and William took the opportunity to run. Happy to be finally free of the monstrosity and its evil home. He met the clearing between the forest and the Washington's house and fell to his hands and knees. It wasn't until then that he realized he was still holding the thing that he had grabbed around the creature's neck. He looked down at it, examining it with the flashlight. It was a frayed, red dog collar with a golden tag that read the name, Prince. When William got back to the Washington's house, he had no idea what he was going to say to them. His hand held the doorknob as he considered what would be worse, lying or telling the truth. At that point, should he even tell them at all? Without notice, the back door was pulled open from inside by Rob, who had been waiting for William's return.
Well, you were thorough, weren't you?
Rob asked when he first stepped inside. The couple gasped when they saw his bloodied arm and the look on the young man's face. I'm sorry to tell you, there's something wrong going on with your property. That was about as plainly as he could think to put it.
Oh, what the hell happened to you, boy? Did you get attacked by something?
Rob asked, holding his hand to his chest in concern.
What do you mean by something's wrong?
William had to think before he answered, afraid he might give the old couple a heart attack. But he felt he had to. I have some reason to believe there is demonic activity in those woods. I myself, I don't have the proper training to deal with it, but I'll get my superior and we'll be back first thing tomorrow, William said, and began making his way towards the front door.
What?
They shouted.
Demonic activity? But what should we do?
The couple were terrified, staring out onto their property with a new sense of fear. I would suggest you lock the doors. Oh, and before I leave, William said, holding out the collar. I found this out there. I thought you might like it back. Mr. Washington took the collar from him.
Prince? Where'd you find this? Did you see him? Is he okay?
The couple were obviously eager for more of an explanation, but William couldn't bring himself to describe what became of their beloved dog. Look, we'll talk about it when I return, he said, and closed the door. He could hear them continue to question and object to his leaving, but William was shaken. He got in his car and wasted no time taking off down the driveway, careful not to pay mind to the forest. Even as he drove away, he knew he was being watched. 5. Once Cameron arrived at home, he parked his car out front on the old dirt driveway. When his mom was towards the end of her life, she stopped taking care of the property like she once loved to. Her garden and lawn had been her happy place. Over time, she seemed to grow less and less interested in tending to the house, as she did most things, including her relationship with her son. He had come down to visit her in 1977, 3 years before her death, and he was concerned to see how overgrown everything had gotten. It was as if the earth wanted to swallow the place whole, and Mrs. Blake was uncharacteristically letting it. Once the house was left to Cameron, he did what he could to tidy it up for potential buyers. He could never get the lawn looking as nice as his mom could, but he gave it his best shot. Realtors, unsurprisingly, had a hard time selling the place, as much as he would have liked to be rid of it at the time. It seemed the house creeped people out, including Cameron. When he tried hosting tours, it wasn't uncommon for guests to leave with expressions of discomfort or fear on their faces. Eventually, he decided to just live with it, and things were fine for Cameron until October of that year rolled around. He found himself more repulsed by the house than ever, as if the trauma it facilitated had congealed into something tangible which oozed from the walls and ceiling, every surface coated with it. Just as the sun began to rise on the horizon, an overcast of clouds rolled in, a chilly wind accompanying them. Cameron rolled down his window and lit another cigarette, looking off across the unkempt field. He looked up at the ancient trees that lined the property. It really had the potential to be a lovely home. He just wasn't the man who was going to turn it into one. Finally, Cameron mustered up the courage to open the door and step out into the cool morning. He walked up the stone path to the house that loomed over him as he slotted the key into place and opened the front door. Once inside, he felt dread wash over him again. He figured it might be due to the time of year, though he hadn't felt this way during any of her other death anniversaries, which was coming up in a few days. In the past, he was sad, yes, but it wasn't the same. This feeling was a weight that made him heavier, like he was wearing a backpack with rocks in it. The feeling only made him grow more tired as he untied his shoes and placed them on the empty rack. The living room sat in bluish shadow, Emily Blake's chair facing the far window like it always did. Cameron gave it little more than a passing glance as he trudged up the stairs, which creaked beneath his feet. He opted not to look at the menagerie of pictures that lined the stairwell wall. Photos that depicted happier days he was not in the mood to think about. Once he reached the top, Cameron ignored the locked door to his mother's room and proceeded to walk into his own. From the time he had gotten discharged from the military, Cameron hadn't collected many belongings. What he did own was stacked inside the child-sized bedroom. Books, figurines, maps, leftover medical equipment, newspapers, and whatever else the man had accumulated in his life since Vietnam sat in the only room of the house Cameron felt he belonged in. He looked out the window to see the sun fully out now, shining a brilliant yellow glow on the golden peaks in the distance. Without hesitation, he closed the blinds and collapsed onto his twin-sized bed. An indiscernible amount of time passed before he was awoken. The room was dark, darker than it should have been in the middle of the day. His tired eyes moved to the clock. 1:26 p.m., it read. It didn't make any sense as he moved the window curtain with his foot to reveal a black night sky. He thought for a moment that a thunderstorm could be to blame, but the room was eerily silent. Suddenly, his bedside lamp flicked on, bathing the room in light. At that moment, he was very awake, and he flung his body against the wall in shock as the presence of a man standing in the corner of his room was made apparent to him. He stood with his palms facing upward and a strangely pleasant look on his face. He wore a dark suit and a white shirt that clung tightly to his thin body. His face was unshaven, sporting a scraggly beard and hair that reminded him weirdly of his own, and sunken eyes that pleaded with him. Cameron was frozen out of complete shock, unable to run or shout at the stranger. "Sorry, Cameron. I didn't mean to startle you. I'm sure you're very confused about the circumstances. I know I would be," the man said in a calm tone that sung in his ears. "So, listen. This is probably going to be hard to hear, so I'll just lay it out as best I can. I am a spirit from beyond. I come to communicate with you about a spiritual imbalance that comes from this property and a tragedy that took place here. What was left of color drained from Cameron's face. Your mother, Emily Blake. Her spirit is stuck, trapped somewhere in this house. She has summoned me here to guide you in order to set her free. I'm sorry, Cameron said, finally able to find his words. How do you know my mother's name? And why is it so dark outside? What are you? Like I said, I am a spirit from beyond. I have been here for centuries and see all who have come and gone. It's dark because you aren't truly awake. Sleep connects you more closely to the spirit world, allowing you to talk with souls like myself if we so wish. A consequence is that this interaction will feel like a dream. So when you wake up, you might not feel like it's real. But I assure you, it is. Sure, okay, so I am dreaming, Cameron said, looking out at the dark sky again. Okay, got it.
No,
the spirit said, in an assertive, almost commanding tone. You must listen to what I'm going to tell you. While you might not remember everything from our interaction, you will remember this. Listen, spirit man, you had me pretty freaked out there for a minute, but I'm gonna go back to sleep. Try and dream of something normal, like that one where I go back to high school or some shit. Cameron said, and rolled over to face the opposite direction of his nighttime intruder. For a moment, things were still enough that he thought the trick simply worked. That was, until he felt a hand placed on the back of his head. Suddenly, his mind rushed with memories of his mother. Memories and scenes he hadn't thought about in years began bubbling to the surface of his brain to the point where he was being bombarded with images of the late woman. Happy times like a trip to the zoo and Christmas were mixed with bad times like receiving a letter saying not to visit her, and of course the funeral. His head burned as the thoughts were ripped from his deepest vault and shown on display. After an agonizing moment, the vision stopped, and his mind spun, trying to cling to the present moment. He turned over to find the spirit now stood uncomfortably close to his bed. This is not a dream. The soul of Emily Blake hangs above eternal purgatory, and you, Cameron, must listen to my instructions if you want her to pass on. Understand? Cameron nodded his head, still in a dazed state. Good. First thing you will need to do is bring another person to the house for a couple of days. It takes 2 souls to set one free. You cannot do this alone. And then what do we do? Cameron asked. I will return tomorrow with more instructions. What's important for now is that you are not alone. Remember this objective in the back of your mind. Let it guide your movements in the waking world. The spirit then walked over to the window above Cameron's desk and slid it open. Wait, Cameron said, causing the spirit to look back over his shoulder. "What's your name?" The spirit gave him a smile, almost like it had been waiting for the question. "Call me Noah," it said, and dove head first from the open window and into the dark night sky. Six. William pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the church and was greeted by the dark space within. During the day, the place was alive with prayer and community. At night, however, the building was a shell. It was vast, hollow, and silent. William's footsteps echoed as he coasted along the worn wooden floor, making his way to the basement stairs where Father Elric's quarters were. Still scrambled by his experience in the woods, William tried to plan out exactly what he would say to his mentor so as to not come across as crazy. He glanced upward at the altar before his descent. The moonlight shone through the stained glass, framing the sullen stage in a colorful glimmer. A stray beam nicely illuminated the tormented face of their statue of Christ in a crimson light. The statue was mounted on the far wall, though its eyes seemed to meet William's from across the nave. He had never felt so unsettled by the image of Christ before, but something about it, the way it looked at him, did little to calm his spirit the way it usually did. It looked sinister, evil in a way Jesus just could never be. Finally, his eyes tore away from the statue, and with a chill up his spine, he descended into the basement. He found that the basement was not quite as dark as the upper level. An oil lamp sat out on the counter next to a pile of what looked to be documents scattered around, as if someone had just been working. The priest jolted when he felt a hand clasp his shoulder. Quickly spinning around, he met the kind eyes of Sister Alexandra, a look of worry written on her face. "Father Bowman, you look ghastly. What's happened to your arm?" She gestured towards the bloody sleeve that William had almost forgotten about in his escape. "Oh, William peeked around the nun to harbor a glance at Father Elric's quarters. "Is the father in?" Alexandra eyed him suspiciously. "Yes, he's in his study. I'll fetch him for you. Now sit down, for God's sake." The young man complied and took a seat on the wooden bench next to the counter while the sister knocked on Father Elric's door. William's eyes were drawn to the documents on the table. Most of them seemed to be newspapers, articles, and random book pages that spanned all kinds of topics and time periods. One headline from the top of a newspaper caught the young priest's eye. He checked the date on the paper and was shocked that it was published just a few days before. It was titled, "3 Dead in Shoshone, Animal Attack, or Psycho Killer." From a brief abstract that he read, William was disturbed by the brutality, veracity, and seeming randomness of the slaughter. What disturbed him most was how the heads were separated and buried so neatly when compared to the state of the rest of the victims. It begged for a purpose, but what purpose that could possibly be, William did not want to fathom. Another hand on his shoulder, this one larger and more firm. He looked up to find Father Elric with a worried yet comforting expression. The man was wearing a baggy shirt and pants, clothes William had hardly ever seen him in. His usually tidy white hair was sticking up at odd angles, and his eyes were tired.
What can I do for you tonight, Father Bowman? You're looking a little worse for wear. Why don't you let Sister Alexandra help you get cleaned up?
Alexandra took a seat on the bench next to William and began rolling up his bloody sleeve to reveal the wound. Father Elric took a seat across from the young man.
So,
he said,
were the Washington's dogs extra rowdy tonight?
William swallowed dryly at the question, wishing the man knew how right he was, so he didn't have to explain it to him. Actually, Father, the Washingtons don't have dogs anymore. It seems that, well, they all ran away or got stolen or something. William had gotten significantly more nervous, something Elric seemed to pick up on as his face became less friendly and more serious.
What happened, son?
The old man interrupted William's ramblings and leaned in with a concerned look. A moment of silence hung in the air of the dim church basement as he attempted to collect his thoughts enough for a cohesive sentence. He cleared his throat and finally spoke. I answered the Washingtons' house call, the one where they said they were having some spiritual issues. So I get to their house at around 5 and went inside to chat. This is when they started telling me about their dogs, and for about a month or so, the Washingtons say their dogs have been going missing. They built a fence, talked to the police and everything, but the dogs still kept getting out. So Mr. Washington asked me to bless the house, and I did. I felt bad about the dogs, but there was really nothing I could do. But then, Mr. Washington tells me about how he's real scared of these woods on their property. Says he feels like there's something out there watching their house. I wanted to do everything I could, so I agreed to take a look around in the woods since they were too scared to check.
That's where you got that nasty bite, huh?
Father Elric said, gesturing to his bandaged arm. Yeah, William continued. But it wasn't just any animal or dog that bit me, Father. It was unreal. Not of this world. Father Elric's eyes died as William described the horror he saw. It was like a man and a dog combined in a grotesque, disproportionate fashion. From what he saw in the dark, the thing stood on tall, gangly legs that bent in jagged angles. It had large, human hands and a canine head. William went on to detail how he suspected there were more of these monsters within the woods, and how he believed they had tried to lead him in deeper. I don't know where they wanted to take me, but whatever it is, I'm actually not sure if I want to know. Father Elric's eyes dropped from Williams for the first time since the two had sat down. He hung his head and swept a hand through his blinding white hair.
Listen, Will. What you saw out there, I know what it is. It's bigger than just that one spot of land. It's a twisted phenomenon. One I wanted to keep you away from.
His head rose to meet Williams once more, his expression grave.
There is a horrific undertaking at hand in our quiet state. Demons. They have returned to Earth. Through the sinning, rotten souls of men, they have returned.